Why do you want to be executed?
I have to be.
Could you tell me what a good way is to die?
It's pretty eerie to think about what goes through someone's mind in their last moments, especially those on death row, right? I mean, consider the kind of last requests they make. Some are so odd or creepy that they get you wondering about what's going on deep inside a person's head. So let's talk about some of the most jaw-dropping final wishes that have ever come to light. 10. John Wayne Gacy. Let's dive into a creepy part of American history and talk about John Wayne Gacy, also known as the Killer Clown. This guy, born in 1942, really brings the chills when you look into what he did around Chicago from 1972 to 1978. Gacy didn't have the best start in life, with a pretty rough childhood thanks to a mean father. He managed to make it look like he was doing all right, with a family and a steady job in construction. But man, there was something super dark hiding behind that normal guy image. The horror began to unfold in 1972 with Gacy's first known crime, and by 1978, he had taken the lives of at least 33 young men and boys. His approach was like something out of a horror movie. He'd lure them to his place, and then things would take a very bad turn, ending with them being strangled. Gacy's house, where he lived like nothing was wrong, had this secret spot under it where he hid the awful truth. Everything came crashing down when 15-year-old Robert Piest went missing in December 1978, which led the cops right to Gacy's door. They found a horrifying number of remains hidden under his house. He was caught on December 21st, 1978, and faced the music for his terrible actions, marking him as one of the worst serial killers in the country. Even though he tried to dodge the blame, the jury didn't buy it and convicted him for all 33 murders, leading to a ton of life sentences and death sentences. Gacy's end came on May 10, 1994, by lethal injection. His last meal was quite something: 12 fried shrimp, a bucket of KFC, fries, and strawberries. His final words were defiant, to say the least, and that's the end of the gruesome story of John Wayne Gacy, a guy who twisted the image of a clown into something out of a nightmare. 9. James Edward Smith. So, let me share something pretty unique and deep with you. You know, on death row, they have this tradition where folks get to pick their last meal, kind of a final act of kindness. But imagine asking not for a typical meal, but for a handful of earth. Sounds bizarre, right? Let's talk about James Edward Smith. Born on October 19, 1962, in Jefferson County, Kentucky, James had a knack for jumping into different gigs, from selling tarot cards to driving a taxi, and he even got into voodoo. Let's zip to March 7th, 1983, in Houston, Texas. James decided to stir up some serious trouble at the Union Life Insurance Company. He wore a mask and had a scary encounter with Deborah Wilson at the cashier's desk. Things got intense, leading to a moment where Larry Roas, the district manager, tried to throw him off with a trick involving a trash can full of money. But things took a dark turn, and James made a terrible choice that changed everything. The chaos sparked a massive search, leading to a chase scene like in the movies, ending with James being caught in an apartment complex parking lot. But wait, the craziness didn't stop there. During his trial, James was like something out of a wild story, even making a brief escape during jury selection. Caught again, he stood trial, revealing himself as someone deep into some dark stuff, like black magic and voodoo, and admitting to some really scary actions. When it came time for James to face his final moments, he didn't ask for a typical last meal. Instead, he wanted Ryaconda dirt, aiming to leave this world through a voodoo ritual. When he couldn't get that, he settled for a cup of yogurt, ending his bizarre and troubled journey with a strange choice, uttering Hare Krishna as his final words. 8. Lawrence Russell Brewer. Let me tell you about something that happened in Texas that's both shocking and thought-provoking. It all starts with a guy named Lawrence Russell Brewer. This man, known for some really bad beliefs, played a part in a terrible crime back in 1998. He, along with two others, John William King and Sean Allen Berry, were involved in the killing of James Byrd Jr., an African-American man, in a way that's just too horrific to detail, in the town of Jasper. These three guys, fueled by awful racial hate, did something unthinkable after spending hours driving around and drinking. They tricked Byrd into thinking they'd give him a ride, but instead, they attacked him. It's a chilling story that brought a lot of attention and swift action from the law. What followed was a big trial that shook Texas. Brewer and King ended up on death row, marking a significant moment because it was rare for such a sentence for racially motivated crimes, while Berry got life in prison. But here's a twist in the tale. Brewer's actions led to a big change in Texas's prison system. Right before his execution in 2011, he ordered a big fancy meal and then refused to eat it, just as a final act of defiance or something. This move got under people's skins so much that a Texas senator, John Whitmire, decided it was time to stop the tradition of offering a last meal to inmates on death row. He thought it was a way to show respect for the victims and their families. So, Brewer's story doesn't just end with his execution, it's also about how his actions brought attention to some serious issues, leading to a policy change and raising awareness about the severity and consequences of hate crimes in Texas. 7. Eric Dila. Talking about Eric Davila's case, it's like something straight out of a crime show, only it's real and pretty heavy. Back in 2008, at a kid's birthday party in Texas, things took a terrible turn. This wasn't just some uninvited guest messing up the celebration. It ended really badly, with a young girl and her grandmother losing their lives. Dila was the one behind the gun, aiming, he said, for Jerry Stevenson, a guy from a rival group, but the tragedy spread far beyond that. Jump to 2018, after years of court battles, trials and appeals, Davila's story hit its final chapter. He was executed. Time was running out, and even the U.S. Supreme Court wouldn't stop it, despite his last-ditch effort to get out of it. The big question in Davila's trial was about his intention. He kept saying he was only after one person, not the child or her grandmother, who were just caught in the middle. The law, though, needed to figure out if he meant to cause all that terrible damage. The prosecutors were sure of it, pointing to Davila's own words to the cops. The court stuff got tangled, especially with debates about what the jury should consider, sparked by what Davila's lawyer argued about during the trial. This issue got up to the Supreme Court, turning the legal spotlight on how the trial was handled. Then there was talk about Dila being under the influence when everything went down, which some thought might change things. But in the end, that didn't change the view of what he did. Another twist came with Sharon Wilson, the judge at Davila's trial, who later became a district attorney. Davila's defense felt that was a conflict of interest. However, the legal system didn't see it as a reason to question the case's handling. As the end neared, Dila left his final words trying to show he was tough, facing the end like a soldier. His execution added another story to the complex and ongoing debate over justice and the death penalty in Texas and the wider U.S. 6. Marshal Michel Nay. All right, let me tell you about Michel Nay. This guy was a legend, known as the bravest of the brave by none other than Napoleon Bonaparte. Nay's story is like a wild ride from the bottom to the top. Starting as just a regular private, he climbed the ranks to become a marshal because he was fearless in battle. They even called him Le Rougeau, meaning the ruddy, because he'd get all flushed and intense when things heated up. Nay was super loyal to Napoleon, even when the political winds changed and it wasn't the popular thing to be. When the Bourbon monarchy came back in power, Nay wasn't having any of it. He didn't like how they treated the army and were cozying up with France's enemies. His dislike for them was so strong that when Napoleon made a comeback during the 100 Days, Ney was all in, ditching orders to capture Napoleon and instead reuniting with him to rally the French troops. In 1815, during the famous Waterloo campaign, Ney was right in the thick of it. He was leading Napoleon's forces like a boss, especially at Quatre Bras, where even though everything was chaotic, he kept pushing and strategizing, holding the enemy forces back. Waterloo, though, that was Ney's last stand. He was out there, bold as ever, leading a massive charge, trying to turn the tide for the French. But it wasn't enough, and Napoleon's army eventually fell apart. After the battle, the Bourbon kings were back in charge, and they weren't about to let Ney off easy. They put him on trial for treason. Ney faced it all head-on, sticking to his beliefs and facing the end like the true soldier he was. His last moments, where he took charge of his execution, were just the final chapter in a life lived with complete devotion to France. 5. Philip Workman. Now here's something touching that happened in Nashville, Tennessee. There was this man, Philip Workman, 53 years old, on death row. He made a final request that was pretty unique. He wanted his last meal, a vegetarian pizza, to be given to a homeless person near the prison. But here's the twist. The prison said no, citing rules against giving stuff to charities. You might think that would be the end of it, but no, the story took a heartwarming turn. The people in the community didn't just sit back. They were inspired and decided to act big time. This led to lots of pizzas being sent to homeless shelters, all in honor of Workman's wish, like Nashville's rescue mission, which helps around 800 homeless folks every night, got a bunch of these pizzas. And there were these amazing people like Marvin Champion, who works there, and Donna Spangler, a lady who was so moved that she gathered up $1,200 to get 150 pizzas delivered to the mission. And get this, even groups like PETA, known for their animal rights work, got involved. They sent over 15 veggie pizzas, adding to the wave of kindness. The good vibes spread even further, reaching the Oasis Center, which helps teenagers in tough situations. They got 17 pizzas, turning a simple act into a big statement about caring for others and sparking conversations about helping those in need. Even though the prison officials, like Dorinda Carter from the Tennessee Department of Correction, initially rejected Workman's request, the whole thing turned into something much bigger. It sparked a citywide movement of giving and got people talking and thinking about how to make a difference in their community. 4. Frank Atwood. Out in Tucson, Arizona, there's this heavy story about a man named Frank Atwood, 66 years old, who was in a really dark place, on death row. He was found guilty of doing something terrible to a young girl named Vicki Lynn Hoskinson, just 8 years old, who disappeared while just doing a simple thing like mailing a birthday card. Atwood's life ended in a way that's as serious as it gets. Before facing the end, Atwood picked a really simple last meal: peanut butter and jelly, salami with mustard, some wheat bread, and tortilla chips, with water or juice to drink. Kind of odd, especially since he said he was fasting before that. This meal was like his final stop on life's journey. As the time got closer to when things were set to happen, Atwood, who was dealing with a really bad back problem that had him in a wheelchair, seemed to be looking for some peace, talking quietly to God, hoping for mercy. In those last moments with a priest there, he didn't say sorry for what he did, but talked about mercy and his beliefs. In Arizona, where they hadn't done an execution for about 8 years, everything happened pretty quickly, and Atwood was gone in about 12 minutes. This moment, really serious and sad, caught the attention of the community, especially those who knew Vicki Lynn, as they came together outside the prison, trying to find some peace and remember her. Atwood kept saying he didn't do it, and his lawyers fought really hard, saying that going through with the execution wouldn't be right, especially because of his health and how much pain he'd be in. But the court didn't change its mind, and so Frank Atwood's story ended. It's a tale that mixes the cold reality of the law with the pain of losing someone, making everyone think hard about what justice means, what loss feels like, and just how complicated life can be. 3. Victor Harry Feger. Victor Harry Feger, a name that's stuck in history, not just for what he did wrong, but for his odd choice of a final meal. Born back in 1935 in St. John's, Michigan, Victor's life took a nosedive into the shadows after his mom passed away, going from small-time trouble to serious crimes and eventually behind bars. Jump to 1960, and Victor ends up in Dubuque, Iowa, where he hatches a grim plan that sadly ends with Dr. Edward Bartels, a respected local doctor, losing his life. Victor tricked the doctor, pretending he needed medical help, which led to this awful turn of events. Now, Victor wasn't too good at covering his tracks. An unemployment form left at his hideout was one of the clues that led the law right to him. He tried to keep the charade going with an accomplice, but eventually they got caught in Alabama. After finding the doctor's body and connecting the dots to a crime across state lines, Victor was up against the heavy hand of federal law. His lawyers tried to argue he wasn't in his right mind, but Victor faced the end calmly, with his last words hinting at the weight of his story in Iowa's legal history. And his final meal request? Just an olive with the pit still inside, maybe his way of wishing for peace, who knows? Victor was executed in 1963, and not long after, Iowa decided to stop using the death penalty. 2. Aileen Wuornos. All right, let's talk about a really intense story that hit a peak back in 2002. This is about Aileen Wuornos, a name that went down in a very dark way in Florida, where she faced the end of her life in a pretty stark manner, choosing just a cup of coffee for her last meal, which kinda reflects the bare-bones reality she lived. You might have seen Charlize Theron portraying her in the movie Monster, showing Aileen's life as one tough journey. From the get-go, she had it rough, dealing with really bad stuff like alleged abuse and getting left behind by her own family. After her grandma passed away and her grandpa turned her away, she ended up living a hard life, moving around a lot and doing sex work to get by. There was this brief moment in the mid-1970s when she thought things might change for the better. She got hitched to Louis Fell, a guy with a lot of dough from yachting, but her unpredictable ways soon sank that ship. Then came Tyria Moore, and together they walked down a path that turned Aileen into someone people would later call a serial killer. She first said she killed a guy named Richard Mallory because she was defending herself, but eventually it came out that she did that to him and 6 others with no sugarcoating it. Her trial really stirred the pot, making folks argue about her mental state and the whole big question of using the death penalty, especially in Florida where it's a hot topic. Moore ended up tipping the scales that led to Aileen getting caught. Aileen owned up to what she did, showing this mix of regret and defiance, standing strong even when facing the music. As her time ran out, Aileen threw out some words that felt like they were from a movie, kinda showing her tough relationship with everything around her. At 46, her life ended, leaving behind a story that pulls you in 2 directions, feeling sorry for her and also horrified by what she did. Her life story is like a twisted tale of sadness and something almost touching, showing how twisted life can get. 1. Jeffrey David Matthews. So let's talk about this serious situation that went down kind of like something straight out of a TV crime show. This guy, Jeffrey David Matthews, ended up on death row in Oklahoma for doing something really bad to his 77-year-old great-uncle, Otis Earl Short, back in '94. This whole deal really shook his family and everyone around to the core. Jump to the day they were set to carry out his sentence, and there's this heavy vibe in the room. Jeffrey, trying to lighten the mood, made a joke about how he kept waiting for a phone call that would save him, but it never came. Crazy thing is, this wasn't his first rodeo. He'd been close to this moment a couple of times before, always thinking maybe he'd get a last-minute pass. The crime itself was like something out of a nightmare. Jeffrey and his buddy, Tracy Dyer, broke into Otis's place and caused absolute chaos. Jeffrey took down Otis in a really brutal way, and Dyer, well, he did something terrible to Otis's wife, Minnie. She lived through it initially, which is nothing short of a miracle, but later on, life and its sorrows caught up with her. When the clock struck 6:09 p.m. on that January Tuesday in 2011, Jeffrey's time ran out. There was this sort of sad respect from the other guys on death row, making noise behind their bars, sending him off in this eerie, echoing goodbye. Jeffrey's final words were a mixed bag. He talked about love and thanks, giving a shout-out to his mom and friends, and even mentioned the noise from the other inmates, finding some weird kind of pleasure in the moment. But he seemed totally unfazed by the pain Otis's family was feeling as they watched the whole thing go down in silence. This whole episode with Jeffrey Matthews getting executed, it's like a stark, real-life drama showing how tough and final justice can be. All right, we just dug into this super creepy topic about what some people on death row ask for as their last wish. I'd love to hear what you think about these odd final requests. How about dropping your thoughts in the comments and kicking off a chat? The way these folks face their last moments with such strange wishes really makes you think, huh?